Hi, this is Barbara Bain. You are listening to TV Confidential.
Ed Robertson, welcoming you back to TV Confidential, radio talk show about television is commemorating August 29th. August 29th, the day the running stopped, the date on which the final episode of The Fugitive originally aired in 1967 by playing highlights from interviews we've had with some of the actors who appeared on The Fugitive. Our second hour will include clips from our conversations with Richard Anderson, Diane Baker, and Jacqueline Scott. Coming up right now, we're going to play a clip from one of our conversations with Barry Morse. Barry Morse, the actor known around the world to fans of The Fugitive as Lieutenant Philip Gerard. The interview was conducted along with my friend Dave White and covered Barry's life and career before, during, and after The Fugitive. The conversation originally aired on Vision Radio back in May 2007, about 10 months before Barry Morse passed away in February 2008, and was recorded using voice-over internet protocol software, which accounts for why Dave's and my voices are heard on the telephone. At the time we interviewed Barry, Barry had just published his memoir, Remember with Advantages, the story of his life and career in show business. With that in mind, we began our conversation by asking Barry how he came up with the title for his memoir, Remember with Advantages.
Well, you see, I've always thought that would be a wonderful title, but I was amazed to find that nobody had ever made use of it. Because it's, as you, I'm sure, know, if you don't, many of your listeners will, it is a phrase from a play of Shakespeare's called Henry V, in which the king, addressing some of the troops before they go into battle, actually says this marvelous phrase. He says, "Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day." And I've always thought that was a marvelous way of expressing one's recollections of things past. And so I was amazed to discover that it had never been used as a title. And so I'm the first ever in history, since Shakespeare's day at least, to make use of it.
Well, you were the first to do a number of things, both not only on stage but also in television. Many people, Barry, know you either as Lieutenant Gerard in The Fugitive or as Professor Bergman on Space 1999, but you've also done so many other things on television, both in America and in the UK. In fact, your career in television dates back to the very first television broadcast that originated from the BBC in the mid-1930s.
That's right.
Yes, could you please talk a little bit about that?
Well, you see, television, as I'm sure some of your listeners will know, originated with the BBC in 1936, when it was a relatively new technique. And very, very few people had television sets because, of course, they were so expensive. And so anyone who was at all eminent in our profession didn't want to have much to do with it because it was so poorly paid. But for those of us who were beginners, more or less, at that time, 1935, 36, were only too anxious to get our feet wet in any way we could. And so I was lucky enough to go over to the site of the first television station was a place called Alexandra Palace, over to the north of London. And I was lucky enough to get to do some of those earliest television shows, which unfortunately, or perhaps mercifully, were never preserved, because there was no means of preserving them.
Right.
And I always remember that the profession as a whole viewed this new technique as something rather extraneous, because I was doing a stage production of which I had to delay joining the rehearsals for a few days because I was doing one of these television shows. And when I turned up 2 or 3 days late for rehearsal, a senior actor said to me, "Well, what have you been doing, young fellow, that made made you unable to be with us for the first couple of... And I said, it was for the BBC, sir. Oh, yes, I see, he said. Oh, you've been on the wireless, have you? That was the name given to the radio in those days, you see. And I said, well, no. Actually, it was for the BBC, but not on the wireless. It was for this new technique. And he said, oh, yes, with great loathing. He said, you're talking about this new television thing, are you? And I said, yes, that's right. And he said, oh, you are a fool, wasting your time on that twaddle. Don't you understand, he said, it's just a fad, like the yo-yo. The public will have forgotten all about it by Christmas.
Oh, what a fraud that he was, huh?
What was generally believed. I was lucky enough to be in some of the first television productions on this earth, although perhaps mercifully they were not able to be preserved.
What did you think the future of television was going to be, Barry? Did you agree with this other fellow, or did you have a different idea?
Well, I could see that there was bound to be a future in it when it became possible for people to achieve television sets for less than the considerable amounts of money that a television set cost in those days.
A lot of stage actors disdained being on television and felt it was beneath their dignity. How did you feel? How did you feel?
Well, I was, like most young people of my era, only too anxious to get my feet wet in any way I could as an actor. And whether it was on the wireless, as they used to call it, or in the theatre itself, it was a great exercise to be able to pull faces and make noises in any way that one was called upon to do.
Of course, if memory serves, a few years later, like in the early 50s, when you and your family moved to Toronto, from Toronto you would commute back and forth from either L.A. Or New York to work on many of the anthology shows on American television, including classics like Playhouse 90. And I would think, coming from the stage, Barry, that would appeal to you because many of those shows were performed live.
Yes, indeed. That was a great appeal and a great challenge, of course. And I was lucky enough to be free of the kind of nervous anxiety which so many actors suffer. I was, having been a Cockney as a youth, I was thoroughly Cockney-like, and not much troubled with such things as nerves. And so I was really only too ready and willing to get my feet wet in any way I could.
Well, it's very interesting because, in fact, when I was reading about your early years in your book, Remember with Advantages, I felt a kind of kinship with you in the sense that you did not come from a stage family. I mean, your parents...
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Both of my parents were servants. My mother was a maid, and my father was a porter, and they first met when they were working on the domestic side of the staff of a hospital just outside of London. Well, it was considered to be outside of London in those days. It isn't now, more or less, but a lovely riverside borough of London called Richmond. They met when they were working in that staff, where there was a staff, if you can believe it, of 13 servants taking care of a medical staff of 7 doctors. 7 doctors, 13 servants to make a fuss of them. And that's where my parents met. And so they had no connections with our profession at all. And in fact, they had never been to what we would nowadays call a legitimate theatre. They had been, I think, when they were courting, a couple of times perhaps to music halls, but they had not been to the straight, legitimate or classic theatre. And so I had no connections with that trade at all.
So basically, you made your own breaks, and you didn't ride on any coattails. I mean, you made your way to the Royal Academy, and through being one thing leading to another. I mean, you forged yourself into a very successful career on stage and later in film and television.
Yes, indeed. I realize now how very lucky I was But my luck was fortified, you might say, strengthened by a great deal of nerve. I didn't, as so many people do, regard our profession as something dodgy and dicey. I enjoyed it very much. It was partly because I had been encouraged to become a choir boy at what was then a very fashionable and wealthy church in the middle of London, because a friend of mine discerned that I had a good, pure, strong treble voice, and he said, "You ought to go and join this choir at this church because they pay their choristers." Not many churches did, of course, in those days. So I went off to this church, St. Columba's it was called, and the director of music there said to me immediately, "Can you read music?" "Oh, yes," I said, lying, of course, but I was cocky and confident. And he then picked up a hymn book, opened it, and passed it to me and said, "Well, sing that." Well, the book, it shows you the kind of flukes that I was fortunate enough to come across. The book happened to be open at a hymn which I already knew, so I sang it faultlessly. And he said, "Oh, well, yes, that's quite good." I'd sung it without really being able to read it at all. And that gave me my first taste of the pleasure and excitement of standing up and making noises in front of groups of other people. But when I first started to go to work in the States, after we first went to Canada in the 1950s, I made it a rule, whenever I could avoid it, not to play English parts, because I didn't want to be tight, as English actors so often were, actors like Basil Rathbone and so forth, as being somebody who could only play English parts. And I already by that time had learned that I could make, if required, but if the checks didn't bounce, I could make other people's noises. So I started to play lots of American characters, and indeed The Fugitive is the only example, I believe, that there ever has been in the whole history of our trade of an English actor playing an ordinary, conventional American character in an American series. That's why so many people to this day think I'm an American. It's not too long ago, in fact, that I was here in London walking around near Trafalgar Square, which is near where I live, and a group of tourists came up to me and said, "Oh, hi there," and I could see that they were from the States. And so I replied in my ordinary voice, which is what you're hearing now, and said, "Oh, that's very kind of you to remember shows of such a long time ago." And they said, "Oh, gee, sorry, we got muddled there. We thought you were that Barry Morse guy." And I said, "Well, in fact, I am, but I don't always make those noises."
You know, Barry, I got a kick out of this when Ed mentioned that when you did The Fugitive, and maybe with others, you were using what he described as an American accent. And I got a kick out of that because, you know, to Americans, we don't have an accent. Everybody else in the world has an accent.
That's right. Yeah. Yet, as you well know, there are as many accents and as many varieties of speech in the US of A as there are states. And depending on where you come from or where you've mostly lived, dictates to a very large extent varieties of noises that people make to each other.
Barry Morse from a conversation with Dave White and me that originally aired in May 2007 on Talking Television, the program from which TV Confidential came to be. And the audio you just heard is courtesy of our friends at Share Vision Radio. Barry Morse passed away in February 2008. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back. One more item. If you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, you know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay Area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
Ed Robertson thanking you for listening to the TV Confidential podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button so that you won't miss our next episode. We'll take a quick time out, then we'll bring you encore presentations of our conversations with Richard Anderson, Jacqueline Scott, and Diane Baker. We come back for hour number 2 of TV Confidential. Please stay with us.